Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
It's just another tool in our toolkit of healthcare tools and education. And that's the way you got to think of it. It's a tool. It's not going to hold that patient's hand for you. It's not going to hear that difference in a person's voice, when something happens. It's not going to be able to judge when you need to put policy aside for a minute and do the right thing when it comes to healthcare and your patient yourself. So that's something AI will never replace.
On this episode, we speak with Dr. Stephanie Hoelscher. Dr. Hoelscher is Professor of Graduate Informatics and Director of the MSN Informatics program at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. With nearly 30 years of experience in oncology, trauma, and informatics, she now focuses on advancing digital health and AI literacy for nurses. In our conversation, Dr. Hoelscher explains her creation of the Nurses AI Literacy Framework to help nurses integrate AI safely and effectively. She emphasizes foundational knowledge, ethical considerations, and avoiding over-reliance on technology while advocating for nursing leadership in shaping AI-driven healthcare. Her work underscores that AI is a powerful tool, but human judgment and compassion remain irreplaceable.
So, Steph, hi. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. As you know, we've been focusing on AI this whole season and trying to talk about nursing literacy and AI and how AI can impact nursing. But before we get into that, what brought you into nursing overall?
Yeah, I have a bit of a odd story. I was military bound. I just knew I wanted to be third generation Air Force and had done a lot of work to get to that point. But I really also liked healthcare. I used to have a Girl Scout leader that was a physical therapist, and I knew I wanted to do something like that. And by the time I got through high school and was getting ready for college, I had this opportunity to get a scholarship, and there was a couple of paths I could have taken. And one was computer science, which I loved back when the Apple IIe, was a big deal. And I'm dating myself a little bit, but I thought that those kind of computers were amazing and could really write very basic code, etc. But I also had the opportunity for nursing, and ironically, nursing won out. And now years later, it's double ironic that I'm actually working in a specialty that's a combination of both. So I kind of landed where I was supposed to, I think, with science, with computers and healthcare. So that's kind of my short version of how I wound up here today.
That's great. And did you always focus on the tech in nursing, or was that also a path that you just kind of followed along the way?
No, it was a path that came much later. I started out as a med-surg nurse and I specialized in oncology, and then really found my path in emergency nursing. I was a trauma nurse for over a decade and loved that. Loved the people I work with. It was really family. And we kind of all suffered and celebrated in the pit together. So emergency nursing is definitely one of my best times in nursing. But somewhere along the line, I just got, I'm not going to say burnt, but tired and really felt like it was time to go move on to something else. And so I did a little bit of time in the ambulatory setting, and they were wonderful people too. I had a great time there, but it was brief. And I knew I really wasn't going to be there very long. I was much more, not an adrenaline junkie, but, much more fast paced. I wanted to do something that was really going to challenge me and do something else for a bit. And then the DON approached me because the academic medical center we worked with was going to implement an EHR. And so that EHR was going to take a lot of people. The CMIO, the chief medical informatics officer that we had at the time, had the foresight to know that we were going to need nurses in there at the stereotypical table. You know, he wanted to bring nurses to the table. So they hired three of us. I was like, oh, this sounds right up my alley because I love health information technology. It's going to give voice to nurses and we'll have a say into how this happens. And so ever since, here I am. So now I teach it. I like to keep involved with what's going on in the inpatient and outpatient settings and how all nurses are using health information technology, digital health applications. But now I get to teach the next generation as well as a professor. So yeah, I'm living the good life when it comes to informatics.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it's wonderful that your chief medical informatics officer had that foresight, because there are so many horror stories of things being implemented without nursing input, and then after they try and implement them, it's like, oh, we have to start all over because this does not work for any of the people who are actually using the system.
Agreed. It was very insightful and he's a good guy. So yeah, I miss working with him. I think he had a lot of insight and foresightfulness to think of adding nurses to the team. And it panned out. We had a great implementation. It's kind of, even when an implementation is good, sometimes it's perceived as not good because it's different, or it might be perceived as more work. Sometimes it is. So it was nice to have some nursing voices at the table for that. And I always say everybody should suffer through a go live at least once, implementation of some of this technology, so you understand how hard it is from not just the back end where I live, behind all the technology, but the front end where the actual bedside clinicians, the people who touch the patients, have to use it. That it's so important to understand all the digital technologies that we work with, because they're all impactful in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, they have the ability to make or break someone's whole career.
Absolutely. Or
Yeah.
your life,
Yeah.
your own personal health care. So
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. I remember when we started implementing the EMR, there was a slew of people that just retired. They were like, no, I'm not
Yes.
doing this. We're out.
We lost a lot of physicians,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
to tell a very funny side story, I won't get into what specialty or what have you, but a physician that was in a resident position and getting ready to graduate or finish their residency was hip deep in our implementation of our vendor, and basically said, I'm not going to stay here. When I graduate, I'm going to go someplace else where I won't have to deal with this. And I was like, oh, that's a smidge naive, because if you think the next place isn't also doing it, because of course that's when we were back early meaningful use and there was reimbursement for providers and adoption. That's money. And all the facilities that could and were qualified for it, or had applicable physicians and uh, Medicaid and stuff like that for reimbursement, were doing it. So it was kind of funny to think that the next place would not be doing it, especially around that time. So I wished him luck, and hopefully he's doing well.
Yeah. And then he probably had to do it again somewhere else instead of just
Exactly.
sticking with the implementation there. That's kind of funny. So I wanted to talk to you today specifically about some of the work that you've done in AI. And
Absolutely.
you helped develop a framework to help nurses be able to really understand and evaluate AI and how can help or hurt in their job flow. So why don't you talk about how did you come up with that, and what prompted you to start looking at that space?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. And to unconvolute a convoluted story, it's in my informatics role, I've done some work with natural language processing, et cetera. Anybody who knows about like dragon dictation, et cetera, that's all what that is. And we joked about how to train your dragon. And so I had some experience in that realm and worked closely with those people that wrote clinical decision support, which, still at this point could be considered what we call Boolean logic. If then, if this happens, then do this. That's how you get your pop-ups and the electronic health records, et cetera. But there was an AI enabled version of it, that was starting to emerge. People being able to write code with Python, all sorts of code writing languages to start getting AI into that to make it faster, more accurate, et cetera. So that was just my dabbling before, of course, November 2022, when the parent company OpenAI just kind of kicked all the doors open with ChatGPT. And then it went from 0 to 60. It's like it was everywhere. Everybody all of a sudden was either interested or an expert. And so recognizing that this was going to drastically change how I taught, what I taught, nurses in general in their professional practice. And I mean all nurses, not just RNs or doctoral RNs, but we're talking LVNs, LPNs, whatever your state addresses them as, and ADN, you name it. This is going to impact everybody. And how are we going to catch faculty up to be able to teach our undergrads that are going to be the first ones out the gate to lay hands on patients? How are we going to teach those that are already at the bedside that aren't going to school? They went to school 30 years ago. They're done with that nonsense. I'm not going back to school for this. How do we reach anybody everywhere? And there had been some preliminary frameworks you see emerging, and a lot of what's out there, honestly, is almost always physician driven. And that's okay. They need help and guidance and education, and they're big leaders at the patient bedside as well. They're our colleagues. We're collaborating with them. We're all one big team. But who's looking specifically at our industry, our profession, the nurses? So I've done a lot of literature review, just synthesizing everything that was out there at the time, and partnered with Ashley Pugh, who is wonderful. She really brings the digital health literacy when it comes to knowing about the digital divide, fairness, equity, equality, etc. It's wonderful, her viewpoints and aspects of things. So I had seen her present on that topic at one of our coffee chats that we have at HIMSS, Health Information Management System Society. And I was blown away. I was like, have you ever published this? Have you ever shared it, with the bigger masses, et cetera? Nope. So I was like, let's do something good together. And she was very supportive of that. And I'm always grateful. I think she's a fantastic collaborator. So we got together and I showed everything that I had reviewed and a framework that I had assembled. And then we tweaked it and made sure it was good to go, and had some people that knew what they were talking about take a peek at it. And off we went. We found a wonderful journal that thought it was worth rolling the dice on, and off we go. So it was really just trying to think of and take the evidence from the literature and come together with what would be something that's translatable, not only in the classroom, but at the bedside. And no matter the organization, it's neutral enough that you can throw it anywhere, which is kind of funny. I'm off to Houston next week to give a talk to a physical security group. And they had a couple of them talking about it. Like, can this translate into another industry? And I go, the acronym might not work, but yeah, the concepts behind it are across platforms, across professions. So that was the goal. And fortunately, that's how it's gone. And we've actually had some organizations reach out talking about collaborative partnerships with maybe trying to implement the framework at their organization. So it's in its early stages still, but it's good. And I'm happy that people are finding value. That makes me happy. So hopefully we can continue on that way.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. Can you describe it a little bit and why you think it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are several factors that you really need to think about that are high impact to nurses. And when you're implementing or learning about AI, any kind of AI, and artificial intelligence is kind of that big umbrella term. There's all sorts of things that fall underneath it, like machine learning. I was talking about natural language processing. Of course, there's generative AI, or what we kind of nickname chatbots. That's really what's impacting us at the bedside when you're using your electronic health record to crawl through all the patient data to create a discharge summary. Some people are using it for handoffs, like shift to shift, summarizing what happened the past 12 hours and hand it off. Of course, natural language processing with this new ambient listening technology. So, a lot of times, and from my experience at the bedside, sometimes technologies will just get turned on and good luck. Here you go. We enjoy this new technology, figure it out. So I never cured for that. I thought there's got to be a better way. And as an educator, I see students, I see my colleagues, faculty that struggle because the technology is outpacing us. Just like medicine, healthcare, it's outpacing us. It's so hard to keep up with. And there's so much literature out there about like physicians. It's once you get out there and you start practicing, everything you just learned is probably defunct and you're so many years behind because the literature and the science just moves faster than us. So, something that could be developed to help us, and again, specifically nursing in this instance, have a foundational knowledge. So, we're starting in the acronym with understanding AI itself. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to write a script. You don't have to be even like a board certified informaticist to understand the foundations. So get out there and kind of just learn the basics. It could be by this podcast, it could be going to get a micro credential. You don't have to run out and get more degrees, but some are out there that are focused on this. So it's totally customizable to what you want to do to advance your knowledge. But start with the foundations. Just at least understand what AI is and understand how it's being used. And that's using it strategically. You want to use it purposefully. You don't want to just turn on the shiny new toy just because everybody else is or because you can. How are you using it to improve patient care? It's sure there's fiscal possibilities that can be tied to it. Perhaps it's in something that can help us bring in more cash. There's all sorts of AIs being used to crawl through reimbursements better, get better reimbursements, etc. And there's some of that that's not helping us. And we've had some lawsuits out there already, specifically like in 2023 with payers that were not using AI to the best of their ability. So that's kind of ethically sketchy in a lot of circumstances. So use it strategically. We want it to be used because we need it, because it's making things better. You got to ask yourself, is this improving patient care? And if it's not, then, why are we using it, kind of deal. And then you really got to start thinking about skills and upskilling and de-skilling. So when you're thinking about what skills do I need to add to my own skill sets to make it to where I can function knowledgeably with artificial intelligence at the bedside or as a teacher or as a student. And with these skills, do I need to add any other things? And of course, I've just gone a little bit blank on that, but with upskilling, there's also the opposite, de-skilling. That's kind of a risk to be considerate of. And that comes along with over-reliance on technology. And AI is so easy so easy to become over reliant on it. And you really have to be present and cognizant to recognize, that I don't need AI for this. I can still do my own thing. So de-skilling is kind of one of those buzzwords that's popping up in the past year or two. There was an article that just came out this year about physicians that do colonoscopies, like GI physicians, and they had used AI to help do reads, films, etc. So they were just taking a look at what happens if we don't use AI. And it turned out that there were several of them that found they could not read as well as they could before AI was implemented. They had literally lost skills in reading that they should still have. That could easily translate over to nursing. And I think about, again, dating myself, like if you had to do a calculation for medications and you're writing it on a piece of tape on your scrub pants, or, doodling it on a napkin on the counter. And then all of a sudden we get, you can use calculators, okay, here's smartphones that can help you with all that. When that technology goes down, think about downtime issues. What are you going to do? How do you revert back and keep those skills and not lose them, because now we're becoming more reliant on the technology to do it for us. So that's kind of a thing we need to think about that would really roll into competencies. Do organizations add this? How do we recognize what skills we could lose with the implementation of AI and add that to a competency that we could evaluate every year to make sure everybody still got it? So that's a question I can't fully answer at this point. And I joke about my shake the tree theory. You don't know what's really going to fall out of that tree until you shake it. And right now we are shaking the AI tree and seeing what's falling out. And that's what we need to address and add to competencies and make sure that new nurses at the bedside for years, et cetera, all keep up with that kind of thing. I think the rest of it is really ethicals, the ethical risk. And that's by far paramount. The ethics is this whole crux on which AI pivots. It can be amazing. It can decrease burden. It can increase accuracy. We're using it to fast track vaccines, cancer treatments, immunotherapy, genetics and genomics, you name it. I mean, there are so many things. It's really only limited by our imagination, or AI's imagination at this point, as to where we could take it and what good we can do. But there's still a couple things that are not quite kosher with some stuff, as far as, is the output from your generative AI accurate? Not always. And that kind of branches into that term like hallucinations or confabulations, where in the absence of data, that data that they use to train these models that the AI functions off of, if the data to answer your question is not there, it wants to make you happy. So it's just going to give you something that it thinks is answering your question. And that something might not always be correct. So that leads to another article that came out this year from OpenAI itself, again, the parent company for ChatGPT, about maybe, just maybe, they might have figured out what the problem is with hallucinations. And that could be because the way these language models use data, the way the algorithms are trained, it doesn't really give permission for the AI to say, I don't know. It's only there to give you an answer, right or wrong. It's there to give you an answer. And if they can retrain the models to be able to say, I don't know, of course, us as the users might be a little cranky because, like, what do you mean you don't know? Give me an answer. I don't care. But we will have to slow down a minute and realize that you get an accurate answer, saying with the generative AI saying, I don't know, or you're going to risk a life or risk your college education, or, that to put all your eggs in one basket of an AI that may or may not be giving you accurate output. So that's exciting if we can really curb hallucinations. that might help with the trust issue of ethics in AI. Maybe we'll be able to trust it a little better. But ethics is its own podcast. It's so deep, so varied what the issues are, the way languages are trained. There's a potential bias issue, and we talk about bias in the data, bias in the patient population that provides that data, etc. Now, not all bias is bad in the data. That's how we identify trends when doing research, and by looking at weird outliers in the data, what caused that. So when we say bias, we don't mean that all bias is bad. That's kind of what we're looking for sometimes. But the way it can skew things, like in schools with non-English speaking students, that's not their first language, it flags them a considerable amount. And that's something just to be knowledgeable of and cognizant of when you're teaching or grading students that may fall into that bucket. And then again, it's just bottomless where the ethics can be impacted with that. There's legal liability issues that are going to start coming with this and the use of AI in healthcare. Not a lot yet in the healthcare realm, but there's a lot of intellectual property lawsuits that are running around right now, especially with these huge application vendors, Meta, Anthropic that does Claude, OpenAI, etc., because they're so hungry for data to help train their models that sometimes, just sometimes, they will take books and art and stuff like that from people who are the original authors, but not credit them, not pay them for it, before they eat that data to train their models. So that is a huge ethical issue too, that at some point might roll into something in healthcare. Anybody who publishes a lot, you can almost guarantee your manuscripts are in some AI somewhere. They're already long gone. You have to think of the ethics too about what you yourself put into an AI, generative AI. With students, you're thinking FERPA, the student privacy laws. You don't want to be copy pasting your students' information into there. You have to be very careful with that. And there's even kind of metadata on the back end. If they created a Word document, even if you copy paste and don't have their name, if you put the document in there, it might show them as author. Whoop, you just gave them their name, etc. And then, of course, more predominantly is HIPAA. We all know how HIPAA really impacts us with data privacy, data security, cybersecurity, and cyber hygiene efforts to keep all this data safe. That's another whole podcast. It's so much to do with that. And AI just strengthens the risk of cybersecurity incidents and stuff if you get AI-enabled hackers that are coming into the system. So that's where HIPAA kind of comes in. I know they were kicking around updating HIPAA this year with encouraging across the board multi-factor authentication, which we all love. That's a login for every piece of technology you have, and it can't be the same password. And what's that going to mean for the tap badges and the pass-throughs? Are we going to have to go back to the old ways, or can we get around that if they change this law, etc.? So yes, there's so many things ethically that can be talked about that we don't have time for today. But I think ultimately, I'm sure I've missed an acronym letter in here somewhere, but we want nurses to step into that leadership role and convey, our skill sets, our importance in the healthcare team. And if you look at every nurse across the country, not just RNs, but everybody, there's almost 5 million of us. I mean, it's like 4.7 million or something. And that makes about over 20% of the healthcare professional population. Physicians, physical therapists, audiologists, you name it. We're almost over 20% of that. So 1 in 5 people in scrubs is a nurse. Not everybody in scrubs is a nurse. We need to learn that on television, but like 1 in 5. And that's an obscene amount of people in a profession who are tired and unhappy. And we've already got so many things with the discussions on staffing and workplace violence and these really impactful topics that we have got to take care of. Throw technology on top of that. And nurses start thinking, how can we use that to help us? Can we put predictive analytics in there to start seeing when somebody is de-escalating or escalating? Can we avert tragedy before it happens? Can we develop applications to help nurses vent or decompress, after a 14-hour shift? Because that's really all we're trying to do, right? Is just survive, survive a shift, get home, put our feet up, get all cozy with a cup of cocoa and enjoy what's left of the evening. That's the type of thing that we need to really start thinking about, using AI, not only for our patients, but how can we use it for ourselves as well? So nurses need to get in there and make your voice heard, professionally, yes, firmly, absolutely. I encourage always industries and vendors and companies and organizations, if you have that empty seat at the table, think about putting a nurse in it. They're always going for our physician colleagues or people that may or may not know anything about how nurses' workflow goes, what we do, how much we impact patient care. And the patients usually see us, 90% of the time, and every once in a while somebody else might come in the room, but it's really the nurses that are doing it. So yes, speak up if you can, and educate yourself, get your organization updated on their policies and what the plan is, the game plan is, to get all your nurses up to speed. So at least there's a minimum functional understanding to be able to work with these technologies, to keep you safe, legal liability wise, to keep your organization safe, to keep your patients safe. And do realize that, yeah, we talk about a lot of doom and gloom and ethical issues and cheating and, AI being lying to you straight to your face, etc. But there's so many wonderful things that it's doing that we could really, if we just get the right people and the right gumption and probably the right funding to get it going, there's so many other things we could be doing out there. There's a lot of big health systems and universities that have nurses, nurse scientists running AI programs. It's amazing what you see out there if you look. And again, I know it takes time. It takes time and effort. And again, a lot of us nurses are just trying to survive the day. But it's worth taking a look if you have that couple minutes to look a little deeper. So I feel like that was really long-winded.
That's fantastic. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about as I've been thinking about our conversation coming up is, over the time in my career, I've noticed that every time we come up with a technology or a workflow or something that helps to reduce the burden on nurses, they just fill that hole with something else. So there's not really a reduction in work. It's just the kind of work then changes. And I mean, I can remember, again, dating myself, my first job out of school working on a med surge floor. At nighttime, we would have 15 patients, 15 post-op patients, and we would share that with an LPN. And, it was a lot of physical in the room, taking care of the patient. And we just had these like little flow sheets that when I think about them now, they were a dream come true. They were very simple. They took about 5 minutes to complete. And that was that. And then the vital signs were on the back. And now when I see my nursing colleagues out on the floor in pre-op, I work in the operating room now. I'm a CRNA by training. And the amount of paperwork they have to get through just to even bring the patient back into the operating room is out of control. It's so much. And I feel like my perception is it seems like that's the stuff that really burns people out. It's not taking care of patients. It's all of the other things on top of it that make the job that much more challenging.
I could not agree more. And there is another couple of great studies about trying to reduce burden Some are very physician driven, of course. We like to, our APRN colleagues, about reducing that pajama time, so they're not doing all their documentation after hours at their house, which is bonkers as well. And a lot of this comes from regulatory requirements. There's things that, again, it's that data. Everybody wants data, and somehow nurses have become the data entry people. And I've been, over my informatics career, built a lot of fields for a lot of forms to get data that we need to report on. And it falls into the nurse's lap to report that. So there's been a lot of effort. Of course, again, usually it's trying to get the burden off the physician, and then it rolls to the nurse. And then, well, the nurses, we don't want to do it. Well, then who are you rolling it to now? So the question is who, not who you should you be dumping it on? It's why do we need it? Do you still need it? We've got things we collect data on that regulatory wise we haven't needed for a long time. So why are you still doing it? I always hated the, say, like if somebody was doing a research study or whatever, and they needed to collect a very niche set of data, and they wanted those data collected, by a nurse or by somebody. So you'd wind up putting a field in that had no other purpose other than this study. And to me, that was always like, I don't think that's something that should have been approved. And that's just my personal opinion. I'm not saying on behalf of any particular institution, but it's stuff like that. There's really got to be what we call governance, some sort of governance process to decide what gets added, what doesn't. But there also needs to be optimization. We've all had EHRs now for years, over decades, and it's time to start going back in and reevaluating what you're requiring your clinicians to document. If it's no longer needed, get rid of it. If it's not keeping the lights on the organization or serving the patients in some way, get rid of it. And that's not to say, though, that nurses don't also enable some of this. I know that we've had where you run reports to see what, say, clinical decision alerts pop off. And there's one that's obscenely out of control and it's nursing focused and they blow through it all the time. But when you ask them, nursing leadership, well, how about turning this off? You guys aren't using it anyway. You just blowing through it. And then they push back and say, no, we need it because it's like a tickler file. It's a reminder. You're like, well, that's kind of enabling your own burden. Why would you want that? That kind of leads into other things. If you need or require your electronic health record to notify you to turn a patient every 2 hours, what do you do when that's down? We got to think independently sometimes too, and not be so over dependent on our technologies to tell us what to do and how to practice. So there's a lot to that. I think it's interesting because that's kind of dated information with meaningful use and criteria and electronic health records getting stood up. But bring that fast forward to today, there's talk about like this new emerging subspecialty in nurses called virtual nursing, kind of like telehealth or remote patient monitoring on steroids, that kind of deal. But there's already ethical dilemma about the use or misuse of virtual nursing if you're trying to do it to take burden off inpatient nurses because you're funneling it towards a virtual nurse who can do things remotely. Our organization's going to say, oh, well, because these 5 nurses don't need to do that anymore, we don't need 5 nurses. Now we need only 3.5. That's not what this is for. This isn't so you can cut monies or cut people. This is to remove the burden and funnel it in a much more beneficial, usable way, and not justify you dropping your inpatient staff because of it. So that's the kind of things where your observation's correct. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to use these technologies to make room for money saving or staff cutting or what have you, but then you're just left with a bigger mess. So yeah, it's something we need to be as nurse leaders aware of and speak to. And If it's justified, defend it. Take care of that and make sure that we're protecting and not adding burden or acting like we're removing burden, but we're really just introducing it somewhere else under another lens. So I think that's a really good observation, and it's worth talking about as a profession. That's not the point of all this. We don't want to reduce burden just to create it somewhere else in another form.
I think you made an excellent point. I think as long as we continue to look at the nursing workforce in terms of FTEs, then it's really easy to just sort of chop numbers and not be able to assign that to somebody's work burden and what's it going to mean for the rest of the staff that are left there, because then that just means, like you said, the burden is just then being dumped on them as you're removing like little bits and pieces of things. So I wanted to ask you to kind of go back a little bit. You were talking about too, hallucinations and inaccuracies in some of the AI and things like that. Do you think that it's helpful when you're using AI to get information for things to ask for sources?
That's a great question, and that's a yes and no answer, because depending on which application you use, and I'm not endorsing any of the ones I talk about, it's just for information purposes, but say like you're using Anthropic's Claude or something like that, or we'll say Microsoft Copilot or you name it, and you put it in there, you ask a question or a prompt, you put your prompt in, and when you're looking at the output, you clarify, well, give me your source. Where did you get this from? Because remember, most of them right now, they're not allowed to say, I don't know, or they don't know they can say, I don't know. It just wants to give you an answer. So it's crawling the internet, or it's crawling the manuscript you gave it, or it's crawling whatever data it has access to that's helping train it or has trained it. And it's giving you what it thinks answers your question. So if you say, I need you to support that with sources, you need to tell me, where did you get this? That's a little bit, I'm not going to say like a crapshoot or something. It's some of it is going to come back very accurate, and it will tell you, okay, well, I got this. If you're playing around, like, and I always say that generative AI prompting and your search engine, your browser, are technically kind of two different things. But if you go into something like Google nowadays, it's almost blended. You're using their AI to be your search engine, your browser. And when you type in, okay, I need this, you'll notice it's starting to put, where did I get it? And you'd think, fantastic, they gave me a source. No, you probably still need to double check that too, because when you go to the sources, you're like, well, I wanted to know about AI and creating a shopping list, and you gave me this article about shopping lists, but it's about shopping for car parts, and it didn't really help me with this. It just keyed off the word shopping list. And so I thought, oh, well, if I give you this website on shopping lists, that checked the box. You're like, oh, no, not really. So in academia, we have that a lot. There's still, I work with my students and I encourage them in the safe, ethical, non-abusive way of using ChatGPT. I want you to tell me how you used it. I want you to tell me how you double checked its output and that it was actually right. And there's been so many things when I've said, look at these 5 articles and tell me, what did they have to do with nursing? And it'll be like, oh, well, we recommended them to you, but none of them had anything to do with nursing. It didn't actually talk about nurses. We just thought these would be good. And you're like, oh, no, they're horrible. So it's just kind of, from the academic viewpoint, it's very sketchy still sometimes. And what it gives you, sometimes it's very good, but it's the ultimate thing I would say, and with clinicians at the bedside too, is you must always still, at this point in time, inspect the output. And especially you guys at the bedside, is if you're doing, say, ambient listening, it's recording your conversation with the patient. It's good enough that it knows the difference between you and the patient, and it transcribes that into output. this is kind of also that legal liability issue. When you sign it, essentially you're saying that you wrote it, you read it, you agree with the content, and you've approved it. Yay, here's my signature. So that's where output might also be good to be cognizant of, that it's not always going to be correct. Now, there's some of these ambient technologies out here that are rock stars. I mean, they were just nailing it across the board. I was doing a nurse practitioner conference a month ago or so, and they loved it. And I was like, oh, I'm so happy that these are working out. It's helping reduce burden, making things faster, et cetera. But there's still that little bit of obligation where you have to evaluate what the output is, because it could still be hallucinated. There still could be confabulations in there. So ambient is one experience, but there's also technologies that are used to, ask about medical things. We joke about consulting Dr. Google. Well, there's healthcare versions of Dr. Google that are APRNs and our physician colleagues and stuff might use to help guide them in the treatment of somebody. And you got to think about that too. What are those people or organizations doing to govern how their data is managed? Is there still a human in the loop when it comes to the development and testing it and making sure that its output is ballpark? What are they considering ballpark? Is anything over 80% accurate good enough? Well, what about that other 20%? And I mean, I'm not going to go cite anyone specifically for our purposes today, but I mean, there's companies that's good enough. And is good enough really worth, rolling the dice on somebody's treatment outcomes? So it's really just being aware and protecting yourself, protecting your organization, of course, protecting your patients, and just know that it's not perfect yet. It's got a ways to go. And I don't know, it could be tomorrow that somebody finds that Band-Aid, like OpenAI talking about fixing hallucinations. Right now, that's theoretical, that's conceptual. We don't know where that's going to go, or if that's really the problem. And how are you going to fix it? I mean, just training it to be able to say, I don't know, is that going to fix all hallucinations? Or, we're still, jury's still out on that one. We'll have to see. But I think it's a great observation. And my big takeaway from that is inspect the output, inspect the journal articles that it sends you to, inspect the content, its resources, because one, they might not exist. That might be bunk, and two, it might not be accurate. It might have just pulled what it thought you wanted to hear out of it. But when you look at the article, it's not even in the ballpark. They just had the same mesh terms or search terms and keywords in it. So it's just worth it to slow down for just a minute and double check before you sign it or before you bank on it, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too, it's one of the experiences that I've had also is getting information on an article, and then you look the article up and it's not peer reviewed. It's like, you know what I mean? There's so much, I want to say like predatory journal type situations where, they just publish whatever and there's not really, it's not really, it's not great information. And that's out there all over the place available. And if you don't scan through and make sure that you're looking at stuff, it's really important to know that and to not sort of hang your hat on it. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on? You've been so generous with your time. I really do appreciate it.
Well, again, thanks for having me. I love talking about this. I think the more nurses that can get, again, at least a foundational understanding, it's going to make your work world a lot better. I found in both my professional, clinical and academic and informatics career histories, it's you come up against people, colleagues, peers, etc., that either pass the buck or put their head in the sand on things. And I usually find it's because there's a fear of what they don't know. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be unsure. But the only way you're going to make that a little bit better is to just give yourself little small bites of exposure and knowledge. And if you have the opportunity, there's freemium versions of all these toys out there that you don't have to pay any money for. Do be careful with your personal information because some of them require like a login, your email or your phone number or something. So be cognizant of that. But essentially, play with it, just experiment, try it out, get a little bit of familiarity, and that tension and that fear avoidance will start to lessen. I always want you to protect yourself, and again, with the cybersecurity issues nowadays, we've got academic medical centers being breached all over the place. It's bonkers. It is. And you have to think about that too, protecting your data, protecting your patient's data, your students' data, your data, etc. But know that it's here and it's not going anywhere. And it's just another digital health revolution that you're going to mark this period in time. 100 years from now, they're going to be like, that's when it started. That's when the AI revolution really started. Hopefully, we won't be saying Skynet or something like that in 100 years from now. I won't. I'll whisper that so our Skynet overlords don't hear me. But anyway, it's just something that we're just going to have to. I think for a while, make sure we keep that human in the loop. Don't be afraid. Just learn a little bit. You don't have to be again a coder. No one's expecting you to run out there and become a data scientist or a business analyst or a programmer or anything like that. But it's do yourself a favor and just learn a little bit each day, and take those baby steps. And at some point, you're going to come comfortable with the technology and may even emerge as another leader to be able to help your colleagues and peers and your patients learn a little bit more about it. It's just another tool in our toolkit of healthcare tools and education. And that's the way you got to think of it. It's a tool. It's not going to hold that patient's hand for you. It's not going to hear that difference in a person's voice. When something happens, it's not going to be able to judge when you need to put policy aside for a minute and do the right thing when it comes to healthcare and your patient yourself. So that's something AI will never replace. Never.
Hello, Angela, my friend. How are you?
Hello, Marion. I'm amazing. How are you?
I am great. I really enjoyed your interview with Steph. I actually listened to it twice because I found it so interesting. And really, the work that she does to help nurses sort of understand how AI can be used, I thought was pretty brilliant. And I don't know how many nurses know that that sort of resource exists.
Yes, I really, really appreciated meeting her and talking to her. She's so cool. She's really, really smart, and I love the really practical approach. And really, that's what it came down to. And we talked about this in the interview. What it came down to for her was making it really practical. This is here. It's a great tool. There are a lot of pitfalls. So if you understand how to utilize the tool and how best it's going to work for you, then it can just make everyone's job so much easier.
It's interesting that you say that it's a tool. I literally was just having a conversation right before this with somebody else about AI and how, yes, in the broad sense, it has been a disruptive innovation. But at the end of the day, AI is a tool like any other tool. And you need to understand how that tool works and how it fits into your tool belt with other tools and how to use it in your practice.
Right. And I think that having vanguard nursing leaders like Steph, who have a great deal of experience in the clinical realm, who also teach, who also are able to then apply that experience to the research and things that they're doing, is incredible that they write that out and share it, and again provide resources for nurses in the field to be able to utilize the tools that are coming up.
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't know how many nurses, clinicians, academics know this tool exists, but I know that they're always looking for ways to help their staff, their students understand how this new technology fits into, their practice or their studies or, whatever area. I hope nurses look for and use her framework for how to utilize AI as a tool in nursing. And I love that she calls it nurses. I think it's pretty easy to remember. The other thing I'll say is I love that she talked about how to train your dragon. That was so funny.
Yeah.
I loved that so much.
Yeah, I really liked her. I think you should connect with her. She's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. She's super interesting. Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.